סולושים הם משתחווים לפני כס מלכותך המלך הכבוד אתה ראוי להכל אתה ראוי להכל כי ממך הכל נהיה בעבורך הכל נברא לך כל התפארת ישבו אמام عرشك ألوف وربوات ويطرح الشيوخ أكاليلهم لك ويهتفون أنت وحدك مستحق أنت وحدك مستحق فمنك كل الأشياء وبك كل الأشياء ولمجدك تراوي لأكون تراوي لأكون כי ממך הכל נהיה בעבורך הכל נברא לך כל התפארת הללויה אתה ראוי כן אתה ראוי הללויה אתה ראוי כל הכבוד מגיע לך כל הכבוד מגיע לך نرفع تسبيحنا ليلا ونهار نرفع تسبيحنا ليلا ونهار نرفع تسبيحنا ليلا ونهار نرفع تسبيحنا ليلا ونهار نصعد بخورنا ليلا ونهار نصعد بخورنا ليلا ونهار ليل ויום יום וליל נקצו את העלק ליל ויום יום וליל נקצו את העלק ליל ויום יום וליל נקצו את העלק ליל ויום יום וליל נקצו את העלק הללויה ליל ויום יום וליל נקצו את העלק ליל ויום יום וליל אתה ראוי להכל אתה ראוי להכל כי ממך הכל נהיה בעבורך הכל נהיה לך כל התפארת أنت وحدك مستحق أنت وحدك مستحق فمنك كل الأشياء
הכל נהיה עבורך ישועה, הכל עבורך.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's launch webinar for Pathway for Peace. And we're delighted to have you join us from your homes tonight. We're joining you from our home in our kitchen up in sunny Wirral in Merseyside. That's where we hail from. My name is Paul Parkhouse. This is my good lady wife.
Good evening, I'm Jess Parkhouse.
And we're going to be your hosts for the evening, taking you through some great content that we have tonight, and just guiding you through the Q&A session at the end. Let me just explain a little bit what the event is about. Tonight is about celebrating the centenary of the San Remo conference, San Remo Resolution, that took place, 100 years ago, 1920, in April. Now, we were supposed to celebrate in April in person, but I don't know if you noticed, but a slight pandemic's got in the way, so now it's an online webinar, and we're delighted to have you join us in that respect instead. And what we're going to unfold tonight is some questions arising from that resolution 100 years ago, in terms of is it still relevant today? And actually what we'll find as the evening goes on is that we're not just looking back today, we're looking forward as well, because what was laid down 100 years ago in San Remo actually provides great guidance still today and legitimacy today for resolving what are still thorny issues in the Middle East. So let's not forget the San Remo conference was what laid the groundwork, the legal framework for the formation of the nation states that we have today in the Middle East, of course, including Israel, but all the surrounding nations as well. So really we're still in the bedding down of that great conference 100 years ago. We're going to talk a bit more tonight about that. So it's going to be interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting.
We've got some great speakers. We've got seven great speakers covering 8 really interesting topics. And we're going to be doing that for the next hour, roughly. And then we're going to have a well-earned 5-minute break for everybody. And then we'll have 30 minutes of Q&A. So what I would direct you towards is you should be seeing a Q&A chat box. And if you have a question that comes to mind as you watch the different videos, please put your question in the chat box. Though what I would suggest before you do that is check, see if your question's already been asked. And if it is, then vote on it. And the more votes a question gets, the more likely they'll be to be discussed in the 30-minute Q&A at the end. We only have limited time and lots of things to discuss. So we'll go for the most upvoted questions. So please upvote your questions. If your question is directed at a particular person, please also mention that. But you don't have to. We'll sort that out at the end. We'll have a good Q&A session. I mean, obviously, this is a Pathway for Peace webinar, and one thing we do ask for is peace amongst all of us as we go through this. So we just ask that your questions will be respectful and positive and constructive, but at the same time, please please voice what it is on your heart, the issue that you want discussing. And even if we don't have time tonight to discuss it, it'll be followed up later and put up on the webinar webpage in days to come. This is the start of a conversation, and it's going to be a great conversation. So bed in and get ready.
Yeah, just to say as well, if you have a question, it's open to everyone. So don't be shy. If you want to ask something, please do ask it.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, let's commit this evening to prayer. This is run by a collection of ministries called Love Never Fails. It's a Christian initiative, as it were. But you don't have to be Christian to be on the call. So I'm just going to say a quick prayer, nonetheless, that tonight would be a blessed occasion for us all, and that we'd all get something out of it. And if you're not religious or you're not of that persuasion, feel free just to just watch. But Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the God of peace that we serve, and that your heart's desire is for peace in the Middle East for all peoples. And Father, we just ask you tonight that you would educate us. We present ourselves to you as students and you the teacher. And would you just impart your truth to all of us tonight so that we might all come out tonight with a better understanding, not just of what's happened in the Middle East over the last 100 years, but the way to peace from here for the Middle East in the days to come. Amen. 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 So we're going to move to our first video, which is called Whose Land Is It Anyway? That's the topic. And it's going to be shared to us by one of our good friends, Clive Urquhart. And Clive is lead pastor of Kingdom Faith Church down in Horsham. Kingdom Faith is a great ministry in the UK and a great friend of Israel over the years. And we're going to be blessed by what Pastor Clive has to bring. So without further ado, let's bring on Clive's video and let's hear what he has to say about whose land is it anyway.
Imagine you were told that your home, where you'd lived for years, legally belongs to someone else. How would you feel? Scared? Angry? This is what both Israelis and Palestinians are being told all of the time. So is there a fair solution? Yeah. The Bible does give hope and clear promises for those on both sides. Obviously, the first place to start in a land dispute is to turn to history and to legal documents. And for the land of Israel, it depends how far back in time you go. The Bible is full of detailed history and legal statements about the land. But some Christians say the Old Testament promises to the Jewish people finished after Jesus. If that is so, does that mean God no longer cares about specific tribes and languages and peoples and nations, or even the one nation he looked after for so many centuries? If so, can we really trust his everlasting promises that he's made to us? But if, on the other hand, God's promises to the Jewish people do still hold true, what about God's love for the whole world, and particularly the poor and the weak and the oppressed? Will God fulfill his promises regardless of how people behave towards him and towards others? And if the Jewish people still have a promised land, does that mean they can do whatever they like with others who already live there? The Bible actually begins with God creating the whole world, which means it all actually belongs to him. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. That means he is the owner. That includes the land of Israel. Now he told the Israelites, "The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. You are foreigners and tenants with me." Ultimately, Neither Israelis nor Palestinians own the land. God is the landlord, and he makes the rules. So what did he say about his land? Starting with Abraham, God promised to lead him to a land which would be given to you and to your descendants forever as an everlasting inheritance. But which descendants? Abraham became the father of many nations. So God repeated the same promise about the land of Canaan to Abraham's son Isaac and grandson Jacob, who was renamed Israel. True to his promise, God rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and used Moses and Joshua to bring them into his land. So what about its previous tenants? Any Canaanites who accepted God's authority through Israel, like Rahab the prostitute or the Gibeonites, were allowed to stay, and God even defended them miraculously. But God never gave the land away. It was still his. So when the Israelites ignored and disobeyed him, he disciplined them as well. Sometimes he even exiled most of them from his land, using first the Assyrians and Babylonians and later the Romans. But starting as early as Moses, God promised, if your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you into the land which your fathers possessed. Sure enough, exiles did return from Babylon. But even afterwards, God said that he had not forgotten the others still in exile. Jesus himself said he longed to gather the exiles like a hen gathers her chicks. But because that generation was unwilling, their house would be made empty again. He also prophesied that Jerusalem would be ruled by the non-Jews until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, until clearly means that the Jewish people would someday rule again in Jerusalem. And 19 centuries later, his prophecy came true during the Six-Day War in 1967. But the Palestinians also have promises from God. Jeremiah 12:14-17 predicted a time of uprooting for both Jews and their neighbours. God said he would have compassion on them all, bringing each one back to his land inheritance. If non-Jews learn to worship the God of Israel, they will be built up in the midst of my people. So the Bible has land promises for both Jews and non-Jewish minorities gathered into God's land like chicks under his wings.
Well, thank you, Clive. That was a great perspective to bring, wasn't it?
Definitely.
And we deliberately started this webinar with the perspective from the Bible. And I think the key thing that Clive had to share there was that it's God's land. And whether you agree with that or not, it's certainly the testimony of the Bible. And it's a foundation on which the rest of this webinar is going to rest in one way or another. Because God's the boss, he's the landlord, and he dictates the terms. And to be honest, to live in God's land comes with a responsibility, doesn't it? We were there, in Israel a few years ago. We lived there for a short period of time, and it's an amazing place. But you can almost feel the spiritual tension in the place because it's God's land. It's there's a high responsibility there for those who live there, and that's what we're pushing into tonight. Is that those who dwell in his land, Jew and non-Jew, would honour the landlord with living in peace. So it's quite a calling that we're looking into tonight. Thank you, Clive. That was an excellent start. We're going to move on now to the second video by a friend of ours, Sarah Greenidge. And Sarah is based down in London. She's a health and wellness consultant. She's also daughter of Dennis Greenidge, who's a friend of ours, who is a pastor down in London and a friend of Israel. She's also a racial equality advocate, which puts her in a good position to bring our next subject, which is a two-state solution. Who's it for? Sarah's been to and from Israel a number of times with youth groups, helping young people get their head around the whole question of the Middle East today. So we're really looking forward to what she has to bring.
Definitely.
So without further ado, let's bring on the second topic and keep your questions coming.
In any debate between two people, it's easy to take sides. But what if it's not black and white? We hear a lot about Israelis and Palestinians, or about Jews and Arabs, but what about the Druze, or the Samaritans, or even indigenous Christians in the land of Israel? The question we need to ask ourselves is, if everyone has the right of self-determination, how many homelands should there be? The concept of a two-state solution assumes that if Israel is given to the Jews and Palestine to the Arabs, each will have a homeland and there will be peace. I think one of the things that we need to think about is, does that mean that peace can only come when no one is a minority anymore? Shouldn't we care about the Christian Arab villages in the West Bank, for instance? Bethlehem has been home to Christians for nearly 2,000 years. And in the late 1800s, visitors at the time estimated that the Christian population would be around 90%. In 1995, when Israel handed this West Bank city to the Palestinian Authority, the Arab Christian population had recovered to around 80%. But now it's well below 20% and falling, and when you go to Gaza, the population is even far smaller. What is the best solution for all the minority groups in the land? Do we solve discrimination or racism by keeping people who are different separated from each other? The question is, how can children learn to treat all people as precious to God if they do not get the opportunity to know them, to play, to study alongside them, and ultimately to share a homeland together? The state of Israel is the only country in the Middle East where minority Christian population is growing. And it's not just them, the Druze, the Bedouins, Baha'is, Samaritans, and of course Israeli Arabs, they are all respected members of Israeli society. Ever since the state was founded, Jews have fled or migrated from countries all around the world. So we have Indian Jews, Russian Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Black Hebrews from elsewhere in Africa, Ashkenazi Jews from Northern Europe, Sephardi Jews from Spain, and Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and the Arab world. Like with any other melting pot in the world, there can be tensions and there will be tensions. But diversity is a core part of what it means to be Israeli. In Numbers 15, verses 15 to 16, the scripture says, "As you are, so shall the foreigner be before the Lord. There is to be one law and one ordinance for you and for the foreigner who sojourns with you." Jesus perfectly lived out this Jewish ideal. He was courageous in his love for the outcasts in society, lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors, and sinners. He told the famous parable of the Good Samaritan because in his own day, the Jewish majority despised Samaritans. The idea that a Samaritan would risk his own life to care for a Jew half dead in a ditch was a reversal of stereotypes, as it were. This was the hero to be admired, imitated, because he reached out beyond bitterness and chose to overcome evil with good. Inspired by Jewish and Christian values, the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the San Remo Resolution of 1920 both envisaged a Jewish national home that would also protect the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish minorities, plural. And that is precisely what Israeli law insists upon. Only in the Jewish homeland are all other minorities protected under law. However, as good as Israeli law may be, no government is perfect, no person is perfect, and discrimination and racism still exists. But you can help support those who serve their country by being a voice for the voiceless, protecting the civil rights and religious freedoms of all minorities in accordance with Israeli law. The Jerusalem Institute of Justice will use your donations to give free legal aid to minorities. And if you are a law student, you could even go and intern with them. At the same time, you can stand with your brothers and sisters in Bethlehem, Christian Arabs who courageously choose to show love and respect to their Muslim authorities, as well as the state of Israel. The First Baptist Church in Bethlehem is serving the needs of families and youth of all backgrounds, providing startup funds for new businesses, and living out the message of Jesus wholeheartedly.
Well, brilliant. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your perspective on that. I think what you brought about the land of Israel being a land for minorities to be cared for is a very important insight. And like you said, that goes back a long way. Back in the Bible, minorities were called to be cared for and protected in the land of Israel. And that comes forward to today. And we lived in, where did we live in Israel?
Sophia.
Yeah, Sophia. Yeah. A Druze Arab village on top of a mountain, on top of Mount Carmel. And the Druze people out there are one of the protected minorities that Sarah was talking about. We witnessed that firsthand. Different, culturally different from the Jewish population of Israel, but nonetheless flourishing in their way.
And actually quite warm and friendly, we found. Once they were able to connect with us, they were very faithful, loyal people, and very open and friendly people to live with. So we lived in the community with them, which was a really honourable experience, a really lovely experience.
It was. And great shawarma, great chicken shawarma kebab. I recommend popping into an Arab village in Israel and getting shawarma. In all of these talks, by the way, there's a call to action. We're not just here tonight to have our ears tickled and then go away and forget about it. But if you go to the webinar website in the coming days, you'll see links to the various things mentioned in these videos. So Sarah mentioned the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, a great organisation. First Baptist Church Bethlehem as well. You can find links to these things later. So please check back on the webinar page as time goes on. And also resources for what Clive was talking about, biblical study resources will also be posted as well. So keep your eye out for that. So let's move on to the next video, coming from another friend of ours, Dr. James Patrick. Dr. James will be bringing a perspective on British history, particularly in terms of prophecy and in relation to the rebirth of Israel. So he's going to be looking at, is Britain mentioned in prophecy? James is the author of a couple of booklets on British history, particularly pertaining to the Bible and, again, connections to Israel, worth a read. He's looked at the last 2,000 years of history. 2,000 years ago, what were we doing in this country? Are we in mud huts or something? There's a big history to cover, but he covers it very, very well. So we're really looking forward to hearing what James has to say. Is Britain mentioned in prophecy? So let's roll the next video.
We all like to think that our nation is particularly special to God, or at least that no other nation is more special than our own. Maybe that's why Christians so often read Bible references to Israel or Jerusalem and tune out the Jewishness, hearing it as just God's people, which is now us. But could the Bible still be speaking promises, both for Israel and for the other nations, including Britain today? Replacement theology is an ancient and particularly deadly form of heresy. Throughout Christian history, it's led the church to carry out brutal attacks on Jews, whom God has rejected. The church now replaced Israel as God's chosen people. Under the Nazis, many German Christians supported Hitler's anti-Jewish policies. Hitler was just doing what Martin Luther, a theologian, had recommended. Yet most of us slip into replacement theology too, without realizing. The Bible is so Jewish that we no longer notice, assuming it refers to us instead. That's just partly true. Romans 11 says that because of Messiah Jesus, we Gentiles, non-Jews, are now grafted in to Israel's olive tree. Wild branches can share the nourishing spiritual sap from the root, but there are still natural branches. Until the end of time, Israel has irrevocable gifts and a calling to bless all other nations. Britain has a long history of resisting anti-Semitic replacement theology. Looking back, the generations who most treasured the Bible were also most loving to the Jews. Now it's our turn to get back on track. This history begins even as early as the Celtic saints, long before Jews arrived, following the Norman conquest. But soon, the Crusades infected Britain with violent religious anti-Semitism. We invented the blood libel, imposed the badge of shame, and then became the first country in Europe to banish all of our Jews in 1290. In God's mercy, he brought us back to the Bible through John Wycliffe's first English translation in the 1380s. His ideas were censored, but eventually lit the fires of church reformation across Europe in the 1500s. And with Britain free again to study the Bible in our own language, we soon saw in its pages God's promises of a future spiritual restoration for the whole Jewish nation before Jesus' return. From the first decade of the 1600s onwards, our great Puritan Bible scholars, early evangelicals, began to recognize that promises of the Jews' physical restoration to their land were closely connected. Puritan victories during the English Civil Wars gave opportunity for Oliver Cromwell to welcome Jews back into England. At that same time, we began to see ourselves in the prophecy of Isaiah 60, verse 9. We could be that nation, the first to transport Israel's sons and daughters in ships back to the land of their forefathers. This idea of Israel's return spread throughout society in the 1700s and 1800s. It's found in Charles Wesley's hymns, John Milton's poem Paradise Regained, and Bible commentaries by philosopher John Locke and Sir Isaac Newton even. The great evangelical Charles Simeon and his famous friend William Wilberforce were champions of Israel's promises, as were the social reformer Lord Shaftesbury, Anglican Bishop J.C. Ryle, and Baptist preacher C.H. Spurgeon, among many others. It was only natural then that after 300 years of prayers and activism, Britain took the lead in the San Remo Resolution of 1920 to restore a national homeland for the Jewish people. As prophesied, we did become the first nation to bring the Jewish people home. Where does that put us now then? Well, we turned our back on the Jews to whom we had made promises, forgetting that those who bless Israel will be blessed. Our mighty British Empire quickly collapsed until even our famous trading powers were surrendered to foreign rulers. Having lost confidence in the Bible, we were blinded by replacement theology and nearly allowed anti-Semitism to take root in our government. But God promises in Isaiah 23 to revisit Gentile nations like ours when we have been humbled and repent. It's time to rediscover who we are through the Bible and fulfill our destiny among the nations as we honor the firstborn birthright of Israel. 2 booklets I've written might be a helpful starting point to learn more.
Great. Thank you, James. That was profound. It was like there's going to be quite a lot of meat tonight. It's going to be it's a buffet, but it's like an 8-course main meal, isn't it? eight main meals, and thankfully it's been recorded, so these videos will appear on the webinar website, so you can go back. I encourage you to do that actually, to get more out of these. So what James shared there was has profound impact and significance for the UK particularly, and that's part of the reason why we're hosting this webinar tonight, because we're keen as a nation to not let our history slip. And in fact, we had to live in Israel, didn't we, to discover Britain's past to do with Israel, because it's generally not taught in schools, and it's actually not taught in churches either. So once you do get your head around that, you understand the legacy that we've inherited. It's a responsibility, but it's also a privilege, and it's also, what's the word? Well, a mandate, really, to use that word again, as a country today, to pray for Israel and to pray for peace. And we'll hear more about that in coming videos. Speaking of which, let's move on to the next one, which is going to be brought to us by Dr. Emily Noteboom, who is one of our Dutch friends joining us tonight. So great that we've got representation from our EU brethren across the river. And Dr. Emily is going to be talking to us about Israel. Is she a colonialist entity? And Dr. Emily is a lawyer, experienced in matters of international law and laws pertaining to nation states and the identity of nation states. She did a PhD at Oxford, looking at the English versus Dutch responses to the French Revolution. We'll have to do that on another webinar, Dr. Emily. But tonight we're going to hear about, is Israel a colonialist entity? And let's roll that one now. Thank you.
Colonialism is when a country imports settlers into other people's lands, making them subject. Examples of British colonies are America and Australia. But isn't this exactly what Israel is doing when it is encouraging Jewish immigration and settlements all through the West Bank? To answer this question, we have to go back to the time of World War I, when empires and their colonies hung in the balance. It was a titanic struggle between empires, the British and French and Italian on the one side, and the German and Turkish Ottoman on the other. The costs were great, but so were the potential gains, because the winners could legitimately confiscate the losers' colonies with all their rich natural resources. Except that this time things were different. The American president, Woodrow Wilson, insisted that the empires were part of the problem, and the solution was self-governance and democratic self-rule of subject peoples. But of course, what to do when the indigenous people weren't mature enough to govern themselves? The Peace Conference of Paris in 1919 gave the answer. There it was decided to install a mandate system. The Allied forces were given responsibility over the newly liberated territories and helped the indigenous people to get ready for self-governance. For the Ottoman colonies, this meant Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, Syria, which included Lebanon, and Palestine, which is modern Israel and Jordan. And Palestine would be given to the Jewish people. But the Jewish people at the time were only about 10% of the indigenous people. So why would the Allies decide to give Palestine to its Jewish inhabitants instead of its Arab inhabitants? Well, at the San Remo conference in 1920, which completed the work started in Paris a year earlier, the Allied leaders came together to decide who the lands belonged to and which of them would be mandated to prepare them for self-rule. Earlier during wartime, Britain had made promises both to the Arabs, led by the Hashemites from Mecca, and to the Jews, led by the Zionist Congress in Europe. The Balfour Declaration, signed by Lord Arthur Balfour in 1917, gave official approval to the unceasing Jewish longing for a national home in Palestine. Interestingly enough, it was immediately supported by Britain's allies, America, France, and Italy on the one hand, but also Japan and China and Thailand. And actually, the entire League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, agreed with Balfour that the Jews had never had any other homeland than the one recorded in the Bible. So they were truly indigenous to the land of Palestine, even though at present they were scattered mostly throughout the world, far away from home. This was a view that was shared by the Arabs at the time. In fact, in January of 1919, Arab leader Prince Faisal and Jewish leader Chaim Weizmann both agreed that they would support each other's claim to a homeland side by side. And this is effectively what was granted to the Arabs and the Jews at the San Remo conference in April of 1920. There, the Arabs were given two mandated areas, Mesopotamia and Syria, which included Lebanon, and the Jews were given one mandated area, Palestine. Palestine itself was split down the Jordan River in 1921 in a Western Jewish territory and an Eastern Arab Kingdom of Transjordan, which is modern-day Jordan. The mandate for Palestine was unique, and it was unique in that only there were existing non-Jewish communities given special civil and religious rights, whether Arab or Druze, Christian or Muslim. But still, politically, the land was supposed to be a Jewish national home, and Britain had a duty to encourage Jewish immigration and settlement throughout their ancestral land. So in this way, the return of the Jews to their homeland is the ultimate reversal of colonialism and imperial control. The Jews can once again govern themselves and determine their own destiny. It is actually also a fulfillment of prophecy, because Jesus prophesied that the Romans would conquer and scatter the Jews, but that eventually God would restore the kingdom to Israel. Freed from non-Jewish rule, they would once again be allowed to worship their own God in their own land. In these days where globalism is very fashionable and national self-governance is seen as small-minded and selfish, it is worth to note that self-governing nations are a biblical idea. Remember the Bible's future vision of a time when the rightful Jewish king, Jesus, son of David, will reign by request over every tribe and tongue and peoples and nation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Emily, for a very clear account there of recent history, but also biblical history surrounding the restoration of Israel in recent times.
It was really inspiring, I found.
Yeah.
Really lovely.
Yeah, very clear, helpful. I think one thing that stuck out to me is how we forget the mentality of the world 100 years ago. And of course we do, we weren't there. And it's not unless you actually look into history that you can remember these things. But back then, the idea of nations, self-governing nations, was still quite a new concept, and empires were still the way to go. And we forget that, really. It was a radical change, the mandate for Palestine and the like, to create new nations, self-governing nation states, of which Israel was just one of many. Tonight, I keep getting reminded of the common phrase, those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. And tonight is about not forgetting our history. Again, it was only when we went to Israel, wasn't it, that we learned some of these things.
Definitely.
Didn't even know that Jordan was once part of the mandate that was originally designated for the Jewish people. Things like that. So I hope you're learning tonight. Hope you're being inspired. And again, please look at the website for more links in coming days that shed more light on these things. The value of nationalism, the value of the nation state. It's important to be up to speed. So should we move on to the next one? I think we've had how many so far? It's 4 videos so far. We're about to move on to number 5. And this is a great subject. Why is Israel wanting to annex the West Bank? So we're right into present-day politics here. And we've got Andrew Tucker joining us tonight to answer this question. And you're in for a treat with Andrew. He's an expert in international law. He's an Oxford-educated international lawyer who's based in the Netherlands. He founded the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, THINK, who have produced many useful resources, and I encourage you also to go and check out their website. And we'll hear from Andrew tonight on this important subject. Why is Israel wanting to annex the West Bank?
Let's have a listen.
Let's go.
Hello, my name is Andrew Tucker and I'm speaking to you from The Hague in the Netherlands. I've been asked to speak to you about this question of annexation. Earlier this year, 2020, the Israeli government announced under Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu that it intends to apply Israeli law and sovereignty to parts of the so-called West Bank. Specifically, the Israeli government said it's going to apply Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and over the settlement blocks. Settlement blocks are those areas where Israelis are living in what has become known as the West Bank or occupied territories. The world community threw up its arms in horror and almost with one voice said, this is illegal. Israel has no right unilaterally to apply its sovereignty over these areas because they don't belong to Israel. In fact, they belong to the Palestinian people. I think this is a generally widely perceived position that these territories are Palestinian. They're not Jewish, they're not Israeli at all. Now, I think international law, in fact, and I would argue, does not prohibit Israel from doing this. I'm not saying it would be wise to do it. It wouldn't be necessarily the right thing to do at this time or in the way that Israel's proposing to do it. By the way, it's off the table at the moment anyway because of the agreements Israel has entered into recently with a number of Arab states. But the issue will come back, no doubt, at some point in time. And so the question really is, who is the owner of these territories? To whom do these territories belong? Now, let's understand here that we're talking about what to the Jewish people are known as Judea and Samaria. This is the mountain country which runs down from north to south of the heartland of Palestine. Now, to Jewish people, this is the very historical and religious heartland of the Jewish people. And while politically many Israelis are very much in favor of a two-state solution for giving the Palestinians a state in these so-called occupied territories, nevertheless, historically and religiously, they belong very closely to the Jewish people. As a matter of international law, there are three issues here. First of all, the principle under international law that prohibits states from acquiring territory by the use of force. That's the first argument that's used to say that Israel is prohibited from taking this step. Now, Israel argues, and I would argue validly, I think it's a fair and a reasonable argument, and stronger, I believe, than any other argument, that these territories belonged to the State of Israel because the State of Israel emerged out of the Mandate for Palestine. Just as many states in the world, perhaps even the majority, have grown out of what were previously mandates or colonies or trusts, so the State of Israel in 1948 was born out of the Mandate for Palestine, which had been created after the First World War in 1922, when the fallen Ottoman Empire territories were divided into mandates. The Arabs acquired eventually sovereignty over the vast majority of the Middle East, and the Jewish people were recognized as having a right to re-establish their homeland in the heartland of Palestine, at least in the western part of Palestine, west of the Jordan River. And the Arabs rejected every offer that was on the table right from that time of 1922 to have an Arab state and a Jewish state west of the Jordan River. They've rejected many two-state solutions, the most important being the partition plan in 1947. And Israel says, well, we declared statehood in 1948 on the territory of the mandate, and the principle under international law of uti possidetis juris, which has governed many emerging states under international law, applies to Israel to mean that Israel has sovereignty. Now, of course, a lot of water has passed under the bridge since 1967, since Israel took back control of these territories, and Israel decided at that time not to apply its sovereignty. Now, that has consequences. They wanted to negotiate for peace with their Arab neighbours, and they did so successfully with Egypt and Jordan. And with both those states, it has peace agreements. And now Israel is negotiating with the Palestinians for Palestinian autonomy. There's no doubt the Palestinians have a right to self-determination, but I believe that right must be exercised, can only be exercised in negotiation with the State of Israel, which has a right to secure borders, a right to territorial integrity, and a right to exist free from threats of force. And very relevant to this is the fact that Israel is operating in a very hostile environment. The West Bank is not just an area that potentially belongs to the Palestinians. This is really the buffer zone between Israel and potentially very hostile Jordan, Syria just to the north of Jordan, and Lebanon, where Hezbollah, which is an extension, a proxy of Iran, is operating and threatening Israel's existence every day. These territories are essential for Israel to have control of them if it is to survive. That's one of the most fundamental reasons why Israel has a right to negotiate about where its borders are and how Palestinian autonomy is to be achieved. So to conclude, Israel has a right here, which I believe is a valid right, both historically and legally, to be heard. The international law issues are very complicated and I believe are not absolutely clear. And of course, law is just one aspect of many which has to be taken into account. You'll find much more information on our website, www.think.info. And I hope you'll find this helpful as we wrestle with these questions. And we all look forward to a solution of this conflict whereby Jews and non-Jews will be blessed in this land and all will prosper based on cooperation and mutual respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for compressing a huge amount of expertise and experience and knowledge into just a few minutes there on what is a very thorny subject. But one thing that stands out to me through what you've been saying is that when you actually do take the time to look at the cold facts of the law underpinning Israel's current situation, there's actually more clarity there than a lot of people think. Because I think our perception of what's going on is often emotion-led, and that can get confusing quite quickly. But thank you for bringing the legal perspective, which I encourage, again, viewers to look into in more depth, particularly through the resources that Andrew mentioned there. Israel do live in a hostile environment, and it's not until you go out there, is it, that you really understand the implications of that. It's easy to judge from a distance in a peaceful nation like ours, but when you go out there and you see how small the country is as well. I grew up in Wales, and Israel's not much bigger. And when you got hostile neighbours, yeah, it does change the dynamics of things. But I don't want to take up any more time from Andrew, because we're going to have Andrew back now, who's going to give us a live talk right now on the subject of who has the stronger right of return. So without further ado, perhaps we can go back to you, Andrew, and you can give us some more of your expertise that we look forward to listening to.
Great, thank you very much, Paul and Jess. Well, I've been asked just to share a few thoughts on this very, very controversial question of the right of return. And it's the question that's put to me is perhaps putting it slightly in black and white. Who has a valid right of return? One of the most curious things about Israel, of course, is that the Jewish people have a so-called right of return. Under Israeli law, if you have a grandparent who would qualify as being Jewish, then you have a right, wherever you might live in the world, to go to Israel and to become an Israeli citizen. And Israel adopted, in that sense, the Nuremberg definition, Hitler's Nuremberg definition of what was a Jew. So when the State of Israel was created, they said, well, you know what, we'll do the same thing and make sure that the Jews in the diaspora have a right to come to their safe homeland. Now, that's not unique by any means. There are other countries and nationalities in the world where there is a similar kind of right to return. Think of Greece, for example, where Greek nationals also have a right of return, and there are other states in the world that have this. The Palestinian right of return is a very different thing. What we're talking about are now somewhere over 5 million Palestinians who claim to have a right to return, who are not living in Israel, but whose parents or grandparents or great-grandparents lost their homes, their houses, their properties, or left them. Most of them in a one-year period at the end of 1947 through to the very beginning of 1949, which is when most Palestinians left what has now become Israel, and they have landed in refugee camps in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And let's just remind ourselves, when we're talking about a Palestinian, we're talking about a non-Jewish Palestinian. Of course, prior to 1948, Palestinians were Jews and non-Jews alike. And the Palestinians are, of course, as we know, ethnically Arabs and many other different ethnic groups making up what are now lumped together and called Palestinians. Now, they claim to have a right of return, a right to return to their houses. Why did they leave? They left because there was a conflict. At the end of the mandate period, which Emily has walked us through, the period of the mandate under the British, which was intended to create a Jewish homeland, there was effectively a civil war going on under the British, and the British were having a difficult time managing it. And the political leadership of the Arab Palestinians was fighting very hard against the idea of a Jewish homeland. We have to be very clear, there was a big difference between the ordinary Arab Palestinians and the political leadership. And it was really the political leadership, motivated by some of their Arab brethren in other countries, who were fighting against the very idea of a Jewish homeland. They rejected the UN partition plan in November 1947, which would have created a Jewish and an Arab state west of the Jordan River. The Arabs, the Arab world generally, and the Arab Palestinian leadership rejected it. Why? Because they didn't like the idea of a Jewish state existing at all. The result was conflict after November 47, leading up to the creation of the State of Israel in 48, and tens of thousands of Palestinians were forced out of their homes in that period, or were called to leave their homes by their own leadership. And then when Israel was attacked by the Arab states in May 1948, the crisis erupted even further. There was more conflict, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, up to 700,000 or even 800,000 Palestinians were forced to flee. Now, of course, the controversy is, why did they force to flee? Did Israel ethnically cleanse the land, or did the Arab leadership call them to leave? I'll leave that dispute to one side. I think Benny Morris, if I might just add, is a fairly nuanced Israeli historian who I think has a balanced view of things, and he would say, well, there's fault on both sides in all of this. In the few seconds I've got left, let me just say, no refugee in the world has a right of return. You know, there are over 20 million refugees. They're governed by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Refugees don't have a right of return. They have a right to be absorbed in the country in which they have ended up. The Palestinians claim a right of return based on one UN General Assembly resolution, 194 in 1949. It doesn't give them a right of return at all. And I think this whole UN refugee system for the Palestinians, which is costing the world over $1 billion a year. The Palestinian refugees are getting more money per capita than any other refugee in the world, but they're being kept in this idea that they have a right of return. And it's been used as a political ploy. And the Palestinians themselves are, I think, the biggest victims of this. And it's standing in the way of a peaceful resolution. We don't have time to go into it. But I think in terms of legal rights, it's not a strong claim. There's obviously a humanitarian issue here. We understand that. It has to be resolved. But legally speaking, we can't really compare the legal rights. And just to close, of course, let's not forget there were up to 1 million Jews who were forced to leave the Arab world in the 1950s, leaving behind their possessions. Unfortunately, they had a state to go to, and that was the state of Israel. Thank you. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Andrew, for that live covering of that important topic. I won't elaborate any further on what you said. You're the expert on the issue, and I'm going to direct instead our viewers to the Think website, www.think, that's THINC.info, and there's plenty of further information and legal position papers and so forth. So thank you, Andrew, for your contribution this evening. We're going to move on to our next speaker now, who's another friend of ours, Stephen Briggs. Stephen lived in Israel for several years, even met his wife out there, and I believe it's your wife's birthday tonight there, Stephen. So thank you for being released to join us this evening.
Yeah, happy birthday, Melissa.
Happy birthday, Melissa. And Stephen today is a documentary filmmaker, and he makes documentary films on the subject of Israel from a biblical perspective, working for the Hatikva Film Trust, and you'll find information on their website. But tonight, Stephen's going to be helping us with the question of, is Zionism racist? Great question. So over to you, Stephen.
Is Zionism just another racist form of nationalism, oppressing minorities? Is that why some people hate Zionists so much? What does Zion actually mean? What if anti-Zionism is actually a modern disguise for the most ancient and enduring form of racism, anti-Semitism? And what if Britain was guilty of this when the Jews were in their hour of greatest need? The word Zion is an ancient name for Jerusalem, and Zionism means the age-old longing of the Jewish people for the one place on earth that was promised to them as a homeland. That is the theme of the wistful national anthem Hatikva, the Hope. And in 1920, the San Remo Resolution legally defined the land of Israel as a national home for the Jewish people. Even so, you can be a Zionist and also support Palestinian national aspirations, as many Israelis do. So why is Zionism and the idea of a Jewish state singled out for special attack? Shortly before his death, Martin Luther King said to an anti-Zionist student at Harvard University, "When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. You're talking anti-Semitism." Ever since the Jews achieved statehood in 1948, after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism has mutated from a religious or racial hatred of individuals to a national hatred. Anti-Zionism goes beyond criticism of Israel's policies to a criticism of its very existence. Sadly, when Britain pioneered this new strain of racism, Israel was nearly stillborn as a result. At San Remo, Britain accepted from its fellow nations a sacred trust of civilization, the mandate to prepare the Jewish people for self-government in Palestine, the ancient land of Israel. Non-Jewish communities were granted civil and religious rights, but political rights of self-determination were reserved for the Jewish people alone in their national home. This meant that Britain was told to facilitate Jewish immigration and close settlement in the land, with the aim of helping the indigenous Jews to reach a majority and so become a Jewish democratic state. Naturally, local Arab Muslims did not like the idea of being a minority under Jewish rule, but it was the anti-Semitic British military administration in 1920 who first suggested to Arab leader Haj Amin al-Husseini that a violent riot against the Jews might force a change of official policy. This failed, and Britain instilled a civil administration instead. Al-Husseini was given power as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, hoping to moderate him, but he only strengthened attacks on Jewish communities. After the Hebron massacre of 1929, British authorities chose to exile the victimised and grieving Jewish residents from their ancestral homes, rather than bringing the culprits to justice. Ethnic conflict worsened, but Britain lacked the courage or desire to fulfil its legal duty for the intended Jewish homeland.
In 1939, the British government issued a white paper that would restrict Jewish immigration to their promised homeland to no more than 75,000 over the next 5 years, at a time when hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees in Europe had been displaced by the Nazis.
Churchill called it a violation of the pledge, abandoning our promise. So just when the Jews of Europe were desperately seeking refuge, Britain shut the doors of their last hope for escape. Even after the war, British policy continued to refuse shiploads of Holocaust survivors, letting thousands drown, imprisoning others, and even returning some to detention camps in Germany, including Bergen-Belsen.
We, as I was told, were sold back to Germany, and most of the ships, the immigrants, were sent to Cyprus. We were the only ones to send back to Germany because Bevin, the foreign minister of Great Britain.
And when Israel still managed to achieve independence after British rule, it was British officers who led the Jordanian army to attack the newborn state. Clearly, British attitudes towards Israel have improved substantially in the past 70 years. Jeremy Hunt, as UK Foreign Secretary in 2019, even called the 1939 White Paper a black moment or a black mark in our history. Yet the UK has never offered a formal apology to the Jewish people and the State of Israel for our racist, anti-Zionism policies during the British Mandate period and the Holocaust, particularly our 1939 White Paper. Until we do, we will never be able to come to terms with the legacy of our past and move forward into a better future, celebrating the place of the Jewish state among the nations of the world. You can sign the petition for a formal apology via the link on the website.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That was another well-presented and interesting summary of the darker part of British history.
It was excellent.
Again, we had to go to Israel to actually understand some of these things. We went to do you remember Athlete?
Athlete, yeah.
It's like a ex-prison camp, holding camp for Jewish refugees returning to Israel after the Second World War, who were held by the British and then sent off to Cyprus, or even, as mentioned there, back to Germany. It was painful for us to relate to our own countrymen doing these things. And I know back then there were reasons, but nonetheless we need to understand our own history in order to move forward as a nation in this area. So please visit the Hatikva website, Hatikva Film Trust website. You'll find details of the documentary shown there, which is The Forsaken Promise. You can also sign up to the 1939 White Paper petition, which is coming out shortly. And if you fill in your contact details on the webinar webpage, we will also send you details when that petition becomes available. And it's also a good way just to keep in touch generally with this conversation as it goes on. So thank you, Stephen, for your contribution on that subject. And we're going to now move on to our 7th video and our last instalment tonight from Rania Saye, who joins us all the way from Nazareth.
Fantastic.
In Israel. And Rania is an Arab Christian in Israel, and she's also the founder of Hope Nazareth, which stands for House of Prayer and Exploits. So we look forward to hearing from Rania this evening on the subject of how can Christians be peacemakers. So I think if Rania doesn't know the answer to that question, no one does. So let's hear what she has to tell us tonight. Thank you, Rania.
Hello, I am Rania Sayegh, and I am an Arab Israeli and also the director of the House of Prayer and Exploits in Nazareth, Israel. Some Christians in the West think they should be pro-Jewish and anti-Palestinian, and some may think that God has rejected the Jewish people, and others may think that it is a hopeless situation to see both sides being healed and released into their full destiny. Actually, God has a plan. He's always in the business of redemption and restoration of nations. So how much more, I believe, his commitment to restore the family of Abraham. He's looking for those who would partner with him to be part of this healing process and peace between both sides. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." His followers are still doing that in the land today. As an Arab, I have been leading the House of Prayer since 2004. Often we find that Christian brothers and sisters who are coming to Israel as tourists forget and may not be aware that God is still working in the land today and not just 2,000 years ago. And there is a remnant of God's people here who are living stones, who are building his unshakable kingdom in the land. Some actually think that God is only interested in the Jewish people, not in the Arabs like us. But what does the Bible say about the family of Abraham and his descendants, both the Arab and the Jewish? What is God's plan for restoration of relationships between both people group? Is it possible that within God's plan, he's going to bring healing and regather both families, Arab and Jewish, together? Is it really a possibility to love each other deeply and walk together and make every effort to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bonds of peace? Jesus is the Prince of Peace and the only answer between both Jewish and Arab people in the land. We find that praying and worshiping together, this is one way of making peace. Through our House of Prayer also, and event and gatherings, we have Messianic young people also coming to pray and fellowship with our Arab young people. Also through Elaf conferences that was run and actually done by a friend of us, Rick and Patty, ridings from Jerusalem, Sukkot Halel. During these conferences, we used to bring Arab young people to be part of this 3-4 days of worshiping, praying, and coming together, where there is this place where our hearts are softened towards each other. Also, we have done, up until now, around, I would say, 13 women conferences called Arab Deborah's Rising conferences, where both Arab women and Jewish women come together. And recently, in the last year, we have done another conference called Deborah's Clan, which the focus was a strategic gathering of both Jewish and Arab mothers in Israel coming together for a powerful time of worship, fellowship, and getting to know each other in a deeper level. A second way of making peace is to reach out with the gospel of peace together and becoming a powerful testimony of God's redemption and love. A third way of making peace is for Jewish and Arab Israelis to spend time together as friends and thus walk in unity as a family. God's love both for the Arab and the Jewish people, and thus he is asking us to receive his heart, to become part of the solution. Refuse to be offended and choose love and forgiveness above all, in order to preserve the unity of peace and also to accept each other in a way God has made each one of us. We need to learn to respect what God has said on each people group, celebrate their calling, destiny, as well as differences. And that's what we do also. One of the most practical ways you can be a peacemaker for us in Britain is to pray for us and also to ask God to give you His heart, both for the Arab and the Jewish people. I always appreciated the statement a dear friend of mine by name Basim Adrinelli has shared, that if you love the Arab people more in soulish love, you will end up hating the Jewish people. And if you love the Jewish people in soulish love, you will end up hating the Arab. We need agape love, the type of love that can love with no conditions. This is God's heart, and it's time for a real love revolution. Pray that the gospel will reach out to both Arab and Jewish people, and the revelation of Jesus from Nazareth will be known in the whole land. Pray that the walls of separation between both people will fall down, and the demonstration of God's kingdom through genuine corporate unity will be a reality in our land. You may also sign up to this mailing list to receive monthly prayers, updates, and find more on what's happening. Another very practical way for you is to make peace through sharing stories about Jewish and Arab cooperation on social media to spread the word that there is hope. And the only hope for peace is through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. You can connect with us through social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as website and email to hear more from us. And we would love to hear more from you. May God bless you and Britain richly.
Well, that was inspiring. Thank you, Rania. You are a living testimony to the power of that love that you speak of. It's a love that's big enough for all peoples, and it's a love that's essential that we tap into if we're serious about peace.
What a lovely way to encourage us all to get a heart for both the Jews and Arabs, and understand God's heart, and ask God to fill us with His heart for both people groups. So thank you, Rania. That's great.
Thank you, Rania. And as Rania herself said, please support what they're doing out there, which is bringing peace between people who, without that love, would otherwise be in conflict with each other. And you can go and find details on their website of Hope Nazareth. So I encourage you to do that. And it's always important as well that we hear good news stories from the land of Israel, stories of peace, stories of walls broken down, stories of love overcoming hate, and all these things, because in those stories lies the seed of the hope that will bring peace ultimately to that land. So let's support Rania and those like her in the land doing these things, because this is the hope that we carry towards peace.
I'm almost sure it's time for a comfort break.
Oh, well spoken.
Is that right?
I think it must be. I think we deserve a comfort break. So we're going to have a 5-minute break now, and then we're going to come back for Q&A time. And I encourage you, if you've got any last burning questions, please get them in quickly. Equally, look through the questions and vote on the ones that you would most like to hear answered in the next half an hour after our break. So we're going to have 5 minutes. It's now 8:47. We're going to come back at 8:52, and we'll go from there. So enjoy your break. Welcome back. Hope you feel refreshed and ready for some good Q&A session. So we've had a lot of great content so far, but now we're going to introduce you to the speakers themselves who are going to reply to certain questions. I'm hoping we can give a question to each speaker, but apologies in advance if we can't. Those speakers, I do ask you to keep your answers short. We've only got half an hour, so 2 minutes each would mean a total of 15 questions. We'll see how we go. So we ask you viewers to upvote the questions you want answering. So the top one, with 24 votes, we're going to pitch that one first to Rania. Rania, if you could answer this one. The question is there a particular role for Messianic believers in a land with pathways? And if there is, how can the worldwide church support them? Any thoughts on that, Rania?
Yes, the Messianic believers in the land, definitely I'm talking about the Messianic believers as an Arab. So I would say definitely others could say more on that because it is a perspective of an Arab here. But as a friend of the Jewish people and a lover of this land, I would say they have a big role in this land, and they are basically the ones who are building the kingdom here, the kingdom of God. And they have also a big influence in secular positions in the land. And I would say the way you would be able to support them is to find these congregations, ministries in the land, pray for them, support them financially if you're able and willing to do that. I would say this is very crucial because this is the remnant of God in the land of Israel.
Thank you, Rania. That was great.
So we're going to ask our next question to Andrew. Andrew, why do the Palestinians have a right to self-determination when Jordan was split off for the Arab population and the Palestinians are not separate from their Arab neighbours? Over to you.
Good. Thank you. Very good question. I think just politically, it's become so well accepted today that the Palestinian people have a right to self-determinate. There's two ways of looking at self-determination. One is as a separate people having a right to a separate state, and then I think the question of Jordan indeed comes in, that Jordan was created as a Palestinian state. But even if that's the case, peoples, even minority peoples, have a right to self-determination within states. And that's not a right to statehood, that's simply a right to some kind of political autonomy within an existing state. So another way of looking at the Palestinian issue is simply to say, well, the Palestinians don't have a right to a state, to be a separate state, because that position has already been passed in the past. What they have is a right to some kind of independence within the umbrella, the overall under the overall authority of a state of Israel. And I believe that's what the Oslo Accords were intended to achieve, and is really the route to the Palestinians, giving them separate national, cultural, even political independence within the existence of a sovereign Israeli state.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. And we'll take the next question. We'll direct that at Sarah, if that's okay, Sarah. I've got a question here. Most of your viewers are over 60. How can we reach the younger generation? Any views on that?
Wow, that's a big one. I think there's a couple of things. I think one, the way that the forums of these conversations have been had have often, I guess, been catered to a certain audience. I think one of the good things of lockdown is we've all gone digital. So I think having more of these kind of free-flowing discussions that are open for everyone is going to encourage more people who are used to this kind of way of working at a slightly younger generation. I'm honoured to be in not that young anymore. But I do think that also a bit more balance. And I think listening and hearing all different perspectives is an important part of kind of bringing a wider demographic of different ages. I think that's something that Gen Z specifically, the kind of younger generation, are looking for diverse panels, diverse viewpoints, and that's what piques their interest. And I actually think we're getting into that direction. And I think it is, as the world becomes a little bit more political, as these issues come to the forefront, we are going to see more young people kind of being engaged here. And I think we just need to keep on pressing on and inviting our networks where we have them. I hope that made sense.
Great, that does make sense. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we've got another question here. It's been heavily upvoted. I'll direct this one to James. Does the Abraham Accord signed with US President Trump this year solidify both the Balfour Declaration 1917 and San Remo Resolution, or is it a separate policy for Israel and the Palestinians? James, have you got any insight on that?
Well, it's a difficult issue, and I know that many people who are really pro one side feel that Trump is dividing the land. And this is a very important thing because in Joel chapter 3, it says, woe to those who divide my land. So it's a problem. The question is what Trump is really trying to do. And really, I mean, not many people know exactly what he's trying to do, but he's certainly having an effect. And even by Israel withdrawing that deal, they were able then to make peace with other Arab neighbors. So it was quite a clever political move. There is a question, some people wonder whether Trump is actually offering Palestinians a state because he knows that they'll reject it. And they've got 4 years to make a decision on this. And if they don't do anything, then the situation will change. So that could mean that it's opening the door for Israel to move into alternative solutions. So there are really big questions here, but still the idea of two-state solution is quite distinct from the idea of the San Remo solution, which is to see the whole land as a Jewish national home with thriving non-Jewish communities within it.
Thank you, James. That's great. Next up, voted question comes from Bryn, and let me just get it back. He says, I hope someone, and I sympathise with you here, sir, will be able, using maps, to take us through the tortuous 20th century history of Israel and Palestine and the legalities of 1940 annexation and 1967 reoccupation of the West Bank. Now, I'm thinking, Stephen, would you be able to advise viewers on good resources for getting a geographical understanding of history in Israel?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to promote a number of films here. If you haven't seen The Destiny of Britain, The Forsaken Promise, or Cyrus Nations UK, there's 3 films that look at the whole span of the history, not only from 1917 to 1948, but actually the 300 years preceding that and leading up to it. And there's a film that we've just just finished, called America and the Israel Effect, which looks at America's role in the restoration and survival of Israel as well. And there's some very interesting people involved in that journey, including William E. Blackstone, who was involved in putting together the Blackstone Memorial, which was a document signed by 413 significant players within America, including J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and the like, as well as mayors of cities like Chicago, looking towards the restoration and being involved in the restoration of Israel. So there's a lot of film resources that look at this. There's another film called Give Peace a Chance, which is by the European Coalition of Israel, which looks at Israel's legitimacy under international law, and a great film by Hugh Kitson, if you're really into the detail, which Andrew features in, called Whose Land? Part 1 Foundations, which looks at this as well. All of those DVDs can be found at ao.vision, which is a website that stocks Christian documentaries, or Hatikva Films website as well. And I trust that sufficiently gives you an overview of some place you can get resources about this history that we've been talking about tonight.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. So we were thinking Emily might be able to answer the next one for us. We've got David asking, given the clauses in the Hamas charter which maintain that Israel has no right to exist and must be destroyed, how is any peace possible?
I think that is a legitimate question, and also one that sometimes we here in Western Europe forgets to remember, that how can you make peace with people who are legitimately, officially out to destroy you? So I think it's not possible to make peace with someone who wants to destroy you. But so Hamas as a discussion partner, to me, is not a valid discussion partner, because the true objective of Hamas cannot be peace if their objective is destruction. But of course, the question is, does Hamas legitimately represent the Palestinian people? And there I would say no. Hamas is not even treating the Palestinian people in a humane and dignified way that we in the West would consider normal for a government. So with Hamas, I would not think it's possible to have discussions, but I think it should be possible to have discussions with a group that more legitimately represents the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Emily. That's great. Let's have a look at what we got now. So the next upvoted question is from Jonathan. It says, I'm a Christian lover of Israel and spent some time serving Jewish people in Jerusalem. Also had some Arab friends. Quick question, what do Arab people think of threats by Iran and Turkey? Do you think the threats to nuclear attack on Israel are real? And are Israel's new friendship with Sudan a good thing? So since it's directed to what do the Arab people think, Rania, would you be able to bring some insight on that question?
To be honest, it's a very complicated answer because, we have, within the Arab people in the land, we have different ideas and different stands on this. But I would say the majority of the Arab people in the land of Israel, those Arab Israelis who live in the land, I would say even the Palestinians in the West Bank are not celebrating the destruction. They don't want to see all of Israel destroyed. These are normal people who want to live in peace, and they will not be happy seeing a nuclear bomb landing on their home, because a nuclear bomb will not, basically differentiate between an Arab or a Jew, isn't it? So I would say my friends, my families who have been in the land for more than 300 years, plus to the Arab people who live with me here, none of them are supporters of this idea and what Iran is trying to do. In fact, we have been praying for Iran, for the salvation of the Iranian people for many years now. And since 2008, as a house of prayer, and many of our Arab friends, we have been praying for revival in Iran and God to really do an incredible thing for the Iranian people to set them free from this regime that really is a very difficult situation they're living under this regime. So I would say this is what most of the Arab people believe. As for the peace, treaties with Sudan or Bahrain and all of this, I would say the Arab people in the land are supporters. Most of them are supporters of this because most of them would really enjoy being able to fly to other Arab nation and as an Arab Israeli, because if you think about it, as an Arab who lives in a Jewish nation, we long to be part also of the Arab world. So for us, it's opening doors, and actually it's a beautiful opportunity for us to reach to other Arab nations also like us, to other Arab people from Arab nations. That's my take on this. It's more complicated than what I just also answered because it can have other also ideas from different people in the land. But for me, for now, I would say that would be enough.
Thank you very much. So, Stephen, we have our next question. We thought maybe you would be able to answer. If a one-state solution is accepted, won't the Jewish population, soon find themselves in a minority since the Muslim birth rate is so much higher?
That's just very simply factoring in current political and numerical values. What we have to remember is actually Scripture talks about the Jewish people returning to the land en masse, and actually in Ezekiel and Jeremiah it talks about there being an exodus that makes the exodus from Egypt pale into insignificance, which is very, very interesting indeed. Because, of course, that had huge ramifications. 2 million people leaving Egypt en masse, 600,000 men plus women, children, and all of their cattle and everything else that went with them. So what we have to factor into that question, that engagement, is the sovereignty of God in the outworking of his purpose and plan. The promise that was made to the Jewish people being back in that land actually is a promise that is for the benefit of the whole world. It's not merely for the benefit of just the Jewish people, it's for the benefit of the Arabs and the indigenous people living there as well. And in Romans 11 verse 15 it says, if the casting away of them was the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? And that word in Greek, life from the dead, is the same word that's used with regard to Jesus rising from the dead, which we find in the Gospels, of which you and I are a consequence. So I think there's something tremendously exciting around the corner, and we need to be lifting our heads and looking up, because actually he's got it under control, whether we perceive it to be that reality or not.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to jump down the upvoted questions, or the question ranking, so we can ask a question to Clive. Clive, you can prick up your ears. We've got a good question here. How can we best support Arab and Jewish believers working together? What are your thoughts on that, Pastor Clive?
As Christians, is that?
The question just says, how can we best support Arab and Jewish believers working together?
I think firstly, the reality of that challenges people, because most people don't think that Jews and Arabs are going to work together. So I think there's a challenge in that. The reality of that then shows us, well, if the reality of that is real, then we need to firstly, I think, pray for more of that. I think two, in terms of how we support people, say financially, then we can give to both Jews and Arabs, because from a Christian point of view, Jews and Arabs working together, they're working together because they're one in Christ, and therefore there's no differentiation between sides in that sense, because in God there aren't any sides in that sense, because he brings people into Christ. So I think the prayer, the financial support, but also that shows us we want to build relationships with both Jews and Arabs in the land. And I think that's really important as well, because as we do that as Christians, from a Christian point of view, we build relationships with both Jews and Arabs, and that sends a huge message to other people that as Christians, we're also not then taking sides, that saying God is pro-Jew but anti-Arab. Actually, God loves people. He loves the Jew and he loves the Arab. So I think there's financial support, there's prayer, and then there's building relationships. And then through building relationships with people in the land, then that will then show us what we can practically do as well, because there are various needs in different ways that we can then practically support people in very, very practical ways. So I think there's just a few things there.
Great. I'm going to direct the next question to Andrew. The question is, in Islam, any territory that's been under Islamic rule, now ruled by non-Muslims, must at any rate be reconquered by Islam. The agreements, therefore, with Jordan, Egypt, and the Emirates are considered in Islam only as armistice agreements. Would you agree with that, Andrew? Any insights on that observation and the significance of it?
Okay, thank you. I'm not an expert on the Islam, so I can't speak it from that perspective. Except, I mean, I would say I understand there is that perception. There is that view within a certain part of the Islamic world, anyway, towards peace agreements, that everything is justified in achieving ultimate Islamic control over the whole world. Having said that, I mean, there's such a diversity of views within the Islamic world that I don't think it's true to say that the the intention of, for example, Egypt or Jordan are now these new Sunni Arab states of the Gulf states have some sort of intention to use these agreements to somehow deceive Israel. So I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about that. I think there is a deep spiritual issue here. There's a deep spiritual aspect, I think, of the Islamic world, but I'm not sure that's true of all within the Islamic world.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew. We're going to jump down to a question from Sally, purely for the time's sake as well. It's directed to Emily. Do you believe that the separation of Jordan from Palestine can ever be accepted as the natural home for many Arabs living in East Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, was so many have family there, as so many have family there, I think she means, yeah.
You know, that's a very hard question to answer. In ideal world, I would say yes. Wouldn't that be a lovely solution to what has been such a difficult situation? Whether in reality that is also possible, I do not know, especially because Jordan doesn't necessarily have a very good track record in its treatment of Palestinian refugees. So that makes me think they are not necessarily ready to actually welcome everybody in. But I would agree that on paper, it does seem like the logical solution to what the problem is, especially if you go back to the original intent of all of Palestine, including what is now the Kingdom of Jordan. But whether that is actually something that could happen, I have my doubts.
Thank you very much. We're going to take the next question we're going to take the next answer from James himself. What are the next steps for Pathway for Peace? How can we help in furthering the cause?
Yes, well, it's great to have you here. I mean, that's the first step. This is just the launch. So the next steps from our perspective are to put the various videos and also the whole webinar up on this same webpage again, so that you can come back and watch them again. Also, we'll have all of the links below so that you can explore all the various different people that have been mentioned and the resources. So really, this is a pathway of walking together, and so you can educate yourself, you can contribute on the Facebook page, go along and subscribe, sign up, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. We'll be putting videos up on YouTube as well, and just submit your questions, kind of write your comments, ask the hard questions, because we really want to connect the questions with the answers. Really, we want to link up the questions people are really asking, particularly younger people, with the communities in the land, and also with those who really know what they're talking about, like Andrew, like Pastor Clive and others. So it'd be great to have you on board with this. And the first thing you can do really to get involved is to put your contact details just below this screen in the contact form, and then we can inform you when new things are happening.
Thank you, James. We've got another question here which has been upvoted. Well, actually, the top voted question at the moment is, will this event be recorded so that it can be watched later? And the answer is yes, I can answer that one. Second upvoted question is, if the Arab people, and I'm going to probably ask Stephen if you could answer this one. If the Arab people are given land of their own, where do the Palestinians come from? And what basis do they have for arguing for a land of their own, which is part of Israel?
Again, another very, very complex question, particularly when you look at the idea of the name Palestinian, which comes from Philistia, and the Philistines actually as a people were wiped out historically, but they've taken on the name of those who we know the most famous one, Goliath, and the modern manifestation of it actually came and was the term was coined by Yasser Arafat as the Palestinians. Prior to that point, they were known as they were being reflected as Damascene or Copts or Syriacs in those territories. It was really around Arafat and his political agenda that brought this name to the foreground that's been adopted by many. And it's a strange, again, we can't answer it in just a 2-minute blurb, but it really is worth digging and looking at the homework of how this entity that is now known as the Palestinians came about. Because none of the other Arab nations around them recognize these people groups, so much so that they leave them in refugee camps in their own nations, rather than allowing them to be absorbed into the Arab entity and community that is there, whether that's in Jordan, whether that's in Lebanon, Syria and beyond. So there's a lot of questions around this, and it's worth looking into. We have another film that looks at this history called Jerusalem, the Covenant City, which is an old film produced by Hugh Kitson back in 2000, so very dated, but it looks at this question as well, and it's worth engaging with and spending more time discussing.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephen. So we're going to take 2 more questions and then bring it to a close. We've got, are Palestinian Christians preaching replacement theology in their church services? I'm going to direct that to Rania.
Actually, none of them are preaching about this subject. I would say this subject is usually avoided in the churches. So, and I won't say that most of them believe in replacement theology. In fact, I would say the majority of the pastors I know do not believe in replacement theology. But usually it is not an easy subject to bring up because of a lot of complexity in our position in the land. So I would say no, this subject is not brought up on a regular basis. It's usually not a subject to be preached on.
Thank you, Rania. We've got another question here, James, which I think you're best answering. We suggest it might be the last question. Now, if you answer it quick enough, we'll get another question in, but it's quite an important question. It comes from Bryn. No one has explained how a pathway for peace based on San Remo could possibly work out in practice. Do you have some thoughts on that? And if you don't feel you're the best one to answer, then please pass it on to somebody else. But I think you probably are.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Is it actually realistic? And I think this comes down to where our optimism is. Many people, even in our VoxPop videos beforehand, when we were asking people on the streets in Britain, we were saying, what do you think is the best answer for peace, Jewish-Arab peace, separation or integration? And most people said integration. That seems to make sense. Put people alongside each other, help them to get to know each other, and they won't hate each other so much because they'll actually get to know each other as friends. However, they said, well, just doesn't look like it's realistic. And there's a lot of pain. A lot of people have a lot of pain, family pain, pain for their wider people. And so that's where really it's only the message of good news through Messiah, through the Jewish Messiah, that brings peace to the heart and helps people to live in forgiveness and freedom and reach out to people who are different. So without the good news of Messiah, yes, it's probably completely unrealistic, but that's not the position we're in. We have a real message of hope, and we've seen this working in people's lives. And we've seen many people transformed by this message. People who hated the other, then they meet the Messiah, and their hearts are transformed. So that is the answer. And so this message of a national homeland for the Jewish people, along with minorities thriving and respected, can only really be achieved realistically through the message of Messiah. That's why we're doing this as Christians, because we believe we do have a message of hope.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. And I do feel that's an appropriate point on which to bring the evening's proceedings to a close. The next question anyway was, great talk, Clive. So well done, Clive. That's in there. But it's not really a question, so we'll quit there. And I think we covered some great ground in the Q&A session. It's been really productive. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer them all, but we will provide responses to unanswered questions in terms of the general theme of things raised on the website. So please keep checking back to the webinar website and also fill in your contact details in the form to make sure you're kept in touch with latest content that's put up there. I'd just like to thank all the panelists this evening for being present and bringing your expertise and your inspiration and your insight to this very important webinar. I think we've all got something from it. It's been very informative and inspiring and food for thought, and I encourage you at home to take this inspiration and do something with it, and look into the resources that are on the website.
And for those who it's new to, I hope it's whetted your appetite so that you can go looking for more information and get more clued up on these matters.
Absolutely. You can find all these talks on the webinar page after this, and also there's a YouTube channel you can subscribe to, social media accounts, and all the different ways we keep in touch these days. So make sure you do stay in touch, because this is a launch webinar. This is the start of a conversation, and it's intended for it to continue. I think we should close with prayer, don't you? I think that'd be a good idea. So let's just close the evening with prayer and commit it to the Prince of Peace and go our separate ways. But thank you for attending this evening. We've enjoyed having you with us, and we look forward to communicating with you in future. So Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for the time we've had together. We thank you that even though we're all in separate places, we feel joined together through this important subject, which we believe is close to your heart. And God, you are the Prince of Peace. We look to you ultimately, Jesus, for the solution. And would you guide us? Would you make us your hands and feet in our generation at this time that we're called to see your peace come to pass in the Middle East and in our own nations in relation to her. So Father, we bless you tonight. Would you bless all who've attended tonight and been part of it? And let us all take something away this evening that would lead us personally into greater peace. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, guys, be released and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we'll see you again online another time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.